1 year ago, billionaire Jackson Cole met a barefoot girl in the park carrying his late daughter's backpack. Today, that same girl stands proudly as the face of a shelter he rebuilt in Emma's memory, proving that sometimes healing doesn't come from wealth, but from the children who remind us how to love again. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now let's get into the story. At 45, Jackson Cole was a man whose name echoed in boardrooms across the globe. The founder of Coltech Innovations, he had built his empire from a dingy basement to the 56th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. With tailored suits, private jets, and silent luxury, he was the epitome of modern success. But beyond the cameras and quarterly reports, Jackson lived in quiet, calculated solitude. He lived alone in a spacious penthouse overlooking Central Park. Every detail of his life was scheduled down to the minute: his morning espresso, his daily trips to the market, his solitary walks. But none of it filled the void that had grown in his chest since his daughter Emma died, and time had not softened the pain. If anything, it had sharpened. It made the world quieter, colder. To outsiders, Jackson was unshakable, focused, untouchable. But behind closed doors, he was a man locked in a cycle of guilt and memory. He replayed old voicemails just to hear her laugh, kept her bedroom untouched, her favorite books still stacked beside the bed. Despite his immense wealth, he hadn't found a way to buy back what he had lost. His heart, once vibrant, now moved only out of obligation. He donated to charities but never visited them. He built hospitals but never stepped inside. Everything he touched turned to gold, except the parts of himself that mattered. Jackson had spent years fixing the world with money. What he hadn't realized was that it would take a child with nothing to help him begin to heal. Every Saturday morning without fail, Jackson Cole left his penthouse just after sunrise. Manhattan hadn't quite stirred yet, in its streets still quiet, shop fronts dark, the city holding its breath before the chaos began. He preferred it this way. In the hush of early morning, he could move through the world unseen, just another man in a coat, coffee in Central Park. Except his walk was never aimless. Always the same path, always the same bench. It was a ritual born from loss, carved into his bones after the day he buried his only daughter. He hadn't missed a single Saturday since. 2 years had passed, but grief didn't care for calendars. It showed up when it wanted, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, always cruel. Jackson walked with long, purposeful strides, but his mind lagged behind in memories. The click of Emma's boots beside him. The way she used to swing their hands between them like a pendulum. Her questions, her laughter, her wild dreams about becoming a fashion designer, a veterinarian, an astronaut all at once. Back then, the bench they always stopped at had felt like a throne. Now it looked like a grave marker. He never sat on it anymore. He only stood nearby staring. Sometimes he left flowers. Sometimes he brought her drawings. But mostly he brought nothing. Just himself and a heart still shattered in places no one could see. People passed him by without knowing his name, his power, or the staggering wealth he carried like a shadow. None of it mattered on these mornings. In the quiet corners of the park, Jackson wasn't a billionaire. He was just a father aching for the one thing he could never reclaim. And yet on this particular morning, something had shifted. He didn't know it yet, but fate was waiting for him. The early morning fog lingered like a whisper across Central Park, curling around the trees and blanketing the paths in a soft, eerie hush. Jackson Cole stepped off the paved walkway and onto the familiar gravel trail that led toward the bench. Her bench. It sat beneath an old maple tree, its wooden slats worn down by years of sun, rain, and sorrow. From a distance, it was just another piece of the park. To Jackson, it was sacred ground. He paused at the edge of the clearing, staring through the mist. A part of him always hoped he'd see her there, legs swinging, coffee in hand, teasing him for walking too slow. Of course, she never appeared. Emma was gone. But grief was a strange thing. It made you believe in impossible reunions. The air was thick with dew. A breeze moved the branches above, and sunlight filtered through the leaves in fractured beams, spotlighting the empty bench like a stage. Jackson's footsteps slowed as he approached. His fingers clenched around the cup in his hand, lukewarm, now forgotten. He didn't want to get too close, he never did. Standing a few feet away, he stared at the bench like it might speak. And then something caught his eye. At first he thought it was a mirage, his mind playing one of its cruel tricks. But no. There was someone there, a child. Tiny still curled up like a kitten on the far side of the bench. Her face was mostly hidden by the hood of a threadbare coat. But what grabbed Jackson's attention, what stopped his breath mid-inhale, was what hung off her small back. A backpack, faded, frayed, yellow with purple trim. The kind you wouldn't look twice at unless you knew every inch of it by heart. He knew it. He would have known it anywhere. The air thickened. Jackson blinked rapidly, heart suddenly slamming against his ribs. It couldn't be her. He hadn't seen that bag in years. He hadn't even realized it was missing. But as the child shifted and the pack turned slightly, he saw it, the unmistakable detail. A butterfly stitched carefully by hand right near the zipper. His throat closed. That butterfly hadn't come from any factory. It had come from Emma's trembling fingers. She'd sewn it herself after begging him to teach her basic stitches. She'd called it her lucky charm. And she never let that backpack out of her sight, until apparently she had. Jackson staggered back a step, the world tilting. The sounds of the city melted away. All he could hear was the pulse in his ears and the distant rustle of wind through leaves. His breath hitched. He hadn't seen it in over 2 years, not since the last time Emma had come home from her volunteer shift at the community center, beaming with stories about the brave girls with big eyes and bigger hearts. She had clutched that bag like it carried more than snacks and sketchbooks, like it held her spirit. And now it sat on the back of a child who did belong to him, who had no idea she was carrying the ghost of a girl who had once dreamed of saving the world. The little girl shifted on the bench, tugging the bag closer to her side, as if instinctively protecting it. Her legs dangled just above the ground. She looked tired, no exhausted, with smudges on her cheeks and knees poking out of holes in faded leggings. Her coat was thin, better suited for autumn than a misty spring morning. Next to her were 2 more girls, both younger, maybe 4 or 5. They were curled together like kittens, huddled for warmth, sharing a crumpled piece of bread. None of them noticed Jackson. Not yet. He stepped forward, just 1 foot slow and deliberate. His heart thudded in his chest. He told himself it couldn't be real. That backpack could have been donated. Maybe someone found it, passed it on. New York was massive. Coincidences happened every day. But deep in his gut, something else stirred a pressure beyond Candy's ribs, an ache that felt too personal to be chance. Jackson didn't move at first. He stood frozen near the path, half hidden by the mist, his eyes locked on the worn yellow backpack resting on the little girl's shoulders. The color, once bright and cheery, had dulled with time, and the fabric was stained from weather and wear. But the shape, the size, and the uneven purple trim were unmistakable. He knew that backpack like he knew the curve of his daughter's handwriting. His breath hitched. He hadn't seen it in over 2 years, not since the last time Emma had come home from her volunteer shift at the community center, beaming with stories about the brave girls with big eyes and bigger hearts. She had clutched that bag like it carried more than snacks and sketchbooks, like it held her spirit. And now it sat on the back of a child who didn't belong to him, who had no idea she was carrying the ghost of a girl who had once dreamed of saving the world. The little girl shifted on the bench, tugging the bag closer to her side, as if instinctively protecting it. Her legs dangled just above the ground. She looked tired, no exhausted, with smudges on her cheeks and knees poking out of holes in faded leggings. Her coat was thin, better suited for autumn than a misty spring morning. Next to her were 2 more girls, both younger, maybe 4 or 5. They were curled together like kittens, huddled for warmth, sharing a crumpled piece of bread. None of them noticed Jackson. Not yet. He stepped forward, just 1 foot slow and deliberate. His heart thudded in his chest. He told himself it couldn't be real. That backpack could have been donated. Maybe someone found it, passed it on. New York was massive. Coincidences happened every day. But deep in his gut, something else stirred a pressure behind his ribs, an ache that felt too personal to be chance. Jackson took another step forward, the gravel beneath his shoes crunching softly, breaking the heavy stillness. His eyes remained fixed on the yellow backpack, as if it held answers to every question that had haunted him for the last 2 years. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He couldn't. The little girl's gaze followed his movement. There was no fear in her expression, just quiet curiosity, the kind that children wear when they've seen too much to be startled by anything anymore. Her fingers were still touching the butterfly patch, as though she sensed how much it mattered, even without knowing why. Jackson's pulse thundered in his ears. He looked back at the bag, every frayed seam, every faded thread, searching for evidence, something to confirm what he knew in his bones. Then he saw it, a lucky charm, a small butterfly. Emma had insisted on adding it herself when she was 7, believing it brought good luck. He knelt down slowly, unsure if his knees would hold him, and tried to steady his voice. "That bag," he said, barely above a whisper. "Where did you get it?" The girl looked at him a long moment before answering, as if weighing whether he deserved to know. "My sister gave it to me," she finally said. "She said it used to belong to a kind girl, one who always smiled even when she was sad." Jackson's throat tightened. He swallowed hard. "Do you know that girl's name?" The child nodded faintly. "She told me her name was Emma." The world seemed to tilt sideways. The noise of the park vanished, leaving only the distant chirp of a bird and the ragged inhale of a grieving father realizing the past wasn't done with him yet. He wanted to say something, anything, but all the words collapsed inside him. The girl continued, her voice soft but sure. "She gave me the backpack because she said it helped her feel safe and brave and loved." Her eyes searched his face. "Did you know her?" Jackson nodded slowly, his lips barely moving. "She was my daughter." For the first time, the girl's eyes widened. She looked down at the ball, then back at him, her small hands resting protectively over it. "She gave it to my big sister at the shelter," she said, "and my sister gave it to me before she left." Jackson's vision blurred. He reached out not to take the bag, but simply to touch the butterfly patch once more. Something flickered inside him, a spark he hadn't felt in years. Grief, wonder, hope. The backpack was real. Emma was gone. But somehow, somewhere, she was still reaching people, still giving. Jackson's hand hovered inches above the faded patch, his fingertips trembling. The butterfly, imperfectly stitched, slightly crooked, was like a whisper from another time. It had been sewn with thread too bright and hands too small, but full of determination. Emma had stayed up past midnight, tongue poking out the corner of her mouth as she pulled the needle in and out over and over again. He'd told her to let the housekeeper do it. She refused. "It's not the same if someone else makes the wings," she had said. Now those uneven wings fluttered again, not in the breeze but in his chest. The little girl shifted uneasily under his silence. She clutched the bag tighter, not possessively but gently, as though it might fall apart if handled too roughly. Her soft voice cut through the thick air between them. "Is something wrong with the butterfly?" Jackson blinked, shaken from the memory. He forced a shaky breath and shook his head. "No," he said, voice rough. It's perfect." The other two girls stirred beside her, tiny, still half asleep. One rubbed her eyes with the sleeve of her coat. The youngest, her curls sticking out wildly in all directions, stared at him with quiet suspicion, then nestled closer to the middle girl. Jackson's breath caught. He looked at their shoes, mismatched, torn. One of the twins had socks wrapped around her hands like mittens. His gaze returned to Lily. "Do you remember the girl who gave that bag to your sister?" She nodded slowly. "Not much. My sister said she had soft eyes and smelled like vanilla. She came every week to the shelter with crayons and snacks. She drew pictures of angels for us." Jackson closed his eyes. Emma, she had always drawn angels. Even as a child, she believed the world needed more wings. He felt something shift deep inside him, an ache folding into something else. Something quieter but no less painful. "I think," he said slowly, "your sister met someone very special." Lily tilted her head, confused but curious. "Was she your daughter for real?" He nodded, unable to speak. The butterfly stared back at him, soft and worn, like it had traveled through fire and rain and childhood dreams and now somehow landed in his hands again. Not just a patch, not just a memory, it was a message, a reminder, a second chance. The weight of the moment settled heavily on Jackson's chest as he took in the girl standing before him, this small, serious child with tangled blonde hair and a backbone forged far too early. She was still watching him, not with fear or desperation, but with something older than her years' wariness. The kind that only grows in children who've learned the world doesn't hand out kindness for free. He straightened slowly, not wanting to scare her off. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated for a moment, eyes darting between him and the two girls still nestled on the bench. Then she answered quietly but clearly, "Lily." Lily, he repeated as if testing it on his tongue. It suited her soft yet strong. How old are you, Lily? Jackson asked. I'm 8, Lily replied firmly. Are they your sisters? He added, gesturing toward the younger girls. Zoe and Mia, she replied, wrapping her arms around her thin body. They're 5. Twins. They don't talk much to strangers. He gave a small nod. That's smart. She didn't smile. She just stared. Jackson glanced at their feet. Wet sneakers, one missing a lace, the other held together with what looked like shoelaces tied around the sole. Their clothes were mismatched, too big, in some places too tight in others. One of the girls had a stuffed animal clutched to her chest, its ear hanging by a thread. It looked like they hadn't had a proper meal or proper care in weeks. And yet they weren't begging. They hadn't asked for money or food. They weren't even huddling around him for warmth. They were just existing, quietly, resiliently. As if this all of it, hunger, cold, cracked sidewalks, was simply the way the world worked. A gust of wind stirred the branches overhead, sending a shower of leaves across the bench. One fluttered into Zoe's lap. She picked it up and handed it to Mia like it was treasure. The small gesture broke something in Jackson. He knelt again, slower this time, careful. Lily, he said softly, do you have anywhere to go? Anyone waiting for you? She shook her head. Mama's sick. She went to the hospital a long time ago. We don't know where they took her. Where is your dad? Her face hardened. He left before the twins were born. Jackson swallowed hard. His throat burned. He'd seen spreadsheets of homelessness reports, statistics and charts. But none of those numbers had eyes like Lily's. None of them wore his daughter's backpack. And somehow, through a twist of fate or something bigger than he understood, he had found her. Found them. In that moment, one thing became achingly clear. They didn't need his money. They needed someone to stay. Jackson stood quietly as Lily adjusted the backpack on her small shoulders. The way she cradled it, tender, protective, made his chest tighten. That same backpack had once swung freely behind Emma as she skipped through museum halls and charity events, always tugging him toward whatever display caught her wide-eyed attention. Now it was a lifeline for another child, one who had never known safety in the same way. But standing here face to face with Lily, Jackson felt something stir that he hadn't allowed in years. Guilt, not the sharp guilt that followed him after Emma's death, the one that whispered, you should have seen the signs, should have done more, but a quieter, deeper kind. The guilt of being blind to the world his daughter had seen so clearly. She had told him about the shelter, had pleaded with him to come just once to meet the kids she painted with, to see what life was like outside the steel and glass walls of his empire. He hadn't gone. Too many meetings, too many obligations, too many excuses. And now the girl who stood before him, wearing his daughter's memory on her back, was evidence of everything he had missed, everything he had dismissed. I didn't know, he murmured more to himself than to her. His eyes were locked on the butterfly patch again, the frayed edges, the uneven stitching. I didn't know she gave this away. Lily's voice pulled him back. She didn't have much, but my sister said she gave what she could. Jackson met her gaze. Your sister, what was her name? Her name is Hannah, Lily replied. She's older, maybe 10 or 12. She said, Emma told her that even when you feel forgotten, there's always someone who sees you. His breath caught. That sounded exactly like Emma. Too wise, too soft-hearted. It had terrified him sometimes how open she was to pain. Lily continued, Hannah carried the backpack everywhere after Emma died. Then one day she hugged me real tight and said, it's your turn now. She left the next morning. I haven't seen her since. Jackson's chest ached. This was more than coincidence. It was a thread Emma had left behind, a legacy stitched into fabric and passed from one wounded girl to another. He looked at Lily again, truly looked at her. She wasn't just another child lost to the city's blind spots. She was connected to his daughter in a way he couldn't have imagined. And maybe, just maybe, this moment was Emma's way of reaching back through time, offering him a chance to step into the space she once stood in. He had never imagined children living like this, alone, unseen, sleeping on benches in the cold. It wasn't that he didn't know poverty existed. He donated to causes, attended galas, signed million-dollar checks for foundations. But none of that prepared him for the raw reality of 3 small girls wrapped in one another for warmth on a spring morning wearing his daughter's legacy on their backs like armor. For a moment, time folded in on itself. Emma at age 8, dancing barefoot across the hardwood floor. Emma with skinned knees and butterfly band-aids. Emma asking, "Why don't we give away what we don't need, Daddy? Someone else might really need it." He had smiled, proud of her kindness, but distracted by a phone call. Now that voice returned clearest through Lily. He sat down on the edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "Lily," he said gently, "do you ever go to the shelter now?" She shook her head. "It closed last year. Not enough money," they said. "After that, we just figured things out on our own." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but behind her words was fatigue no child should ever carry. Jackson leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. "Have you ever asked anyone for help?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Sometimes. But people don't really see us, or they get scared. One lady gave us a sandwich once, but mostly, we stay quiet. It's easier that way." He nodded slowly. "But not right," he said. "It's not supposed to be this way." Her eyes met his again. Those weak, her acceptance crushed him. A billionaire surrounded by comfort and luxury every day, now sitting next to a child who had accepted hunger and fear as facts of life. Jackson felt something inside him fracture, not break, but shift like a door swinging open on rusted hinges. "Do you trust me, Lily?" he asked suddenly. She didn't answer right away. She looked at him long and hard, her little brow furrowed as if measuring more than his words, his soul maybe. Then slowly she nodded. And just like that, something unspoken passed between them. Two hearts forever changed by the same girl. One lost her, the other carried her forward. The late morning sun filtered through the branches above, casting a soft dappled light over the cracked pavement as Jackson and Lily walked side by side. The girls Zoe and Mia trailed quietly behind, one holding the other's hand, the stuffed animal still pressed tightly to her chest. It was a strange procession, a billionaire in tailored shoes stained with dew, and three children who had weathered more storms than any child ever should. Jackson felt it building in his chest, the old pressure, the voice that used to guide every decision. Be rational. Think with your head, not your heart. It had kept him sharp, powerful, respected. It had also kept him numb, detached. But that voice was growing quieter now, smothered by another one that sounded suspiciously like Emma's. They stopped at a street corner just past the shuttered shelter. There was a tiny cafe wedged between two brick buildings, its awning faded and cracked, but the sign in the window still flickered. "Open," Jackson turned to Lily. "Are you girls hungry?" Zoe and Mia looked up immediately. Lily hesitated. "I can pay," Jackson added quickly, sensing her discomfort. "You wouldn't owe me anything." She bit her lip, glancing at her sisters, then gave a tiny nod. Inside the cafe, the contrast was jarring. Warm lighting, the soft hum of an old radio playing jazz, and the scent of eggs and cinnamon toast drifting from the kitchen. The place was nearly empty, just a waitress wiping down a counter and an older couple sipping coffee by the window. Jackson ushered the girls to a booth near the back. They sat stiffly at first, unsure of how to behave in such a clean, quiet space. Their legs didn't reach the floor, and they kept their hands in their laps until Jackson nudged the menu toward them. "Get what?" Mia pointed timidly at the picture of pancakes with strawberries. Zoe echoed her choice with a whisper. Lily stared at the menu like it was written in another language, then finally murmured, "Just toast is okay." Jackson shook his head. "Let me make you a deal, Lily. You eat something real, and I'll eat something healthy. That way we both do something new." She blinked, then smiled barely, but enough to soften her whole face. When the food arrived, the girls hesitated again, as if waiting for permission. Jackson gave them a small nod, and suddenly hunger overtook manners. Pancakes vanished in seconds. Sticky fingers giggles between bites and syrup smudges appeared like magic. Jackson sat back, watching them with a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. They were just kids again. Not street children, not statistics, just little girls laughing with maple syrup on their cheeks. He'd missed this with Emma, the messy breakfast, the silliness. Business trips, investor meetings, emails at all hours had stolen those moments. And now, sitting across from three strangers, he realized he didn't want to miss it again. When the plates were empty and the energy faded into contentment, Jackson leaned forward. "Lily, I know this is sudden, but would you let me help?" She looked wary again, the flicker of caution returning. I don't mean for just today. I mean really help. A place to sleep, warm clothes, safety. No more benches or shelters that close without warning. Lily studied him for a long time. Why, she asked, not accusing, just confused. Why us? Jackson paused, choosing his words carefully. Because someone I loved gave you something that meant the world to her, and because I think she'd want me to keep giving too. Lily's fingers fidgeted with the edge of the table. What if it doesn't last? What if you change your mind? The question hit hard. He couldn't blame her. The world had probably promised her a lot of things and delivered on none of them. I can't promise everything will be perfect, he said honestly, but I can promise I won't walk away. She didn't respond immediately, but something shifted in her expression. A tiny crack in the wall she had built to survive. Jackson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. This is my number. The phone goes directly to me. No assistants, no screens, just me. If you ever need something, anything, you call. Lily accepted it slowly as if it might vanish in her hand. Zoe tugged on her sister's sleeve and whispered something. Lily leaned in to listen, then looked up at Jackson. Do you have a home? He smiled gently. Yes, a big empty one. Mia, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. Can we see it? The question came like a wave, simple but filled with hope. He nodded. You can. That afternoon, Jackson called a driver and arranged for car seats, something he'd never imagined himself needing. As the girls piled into the black SUV, their wide eyes taking in the plush seats and tiny television screens, Jackson sat beside them with an unexpected feeling blooming in his chest. He didn't know what came next, not exactly. But he knew what wouldn't happen. He wouldn't turn away. Back at his penthouse, the doorman blinked in confusion as Jackson entered with three small girls at his side. Zoe clutched his hand. Mia stared at the chandelier like it belonged in a fairy tale. Lily walked a few steps behind, scanning every detail like a hawk, protective, cautious, brave. The elevator ride was quiet, the soft hum and flicker of numbers the only sound. When they stepped into the living room, the girls froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened up to a skyline that stretched for miles. A fireplace flickered quietly. The room smelled of cedar wood and linen. This is your house, Zoe whispered. For now, Jackson said. Maybe if you'd like, it can be yours too. The three girls exchanged a glance. It wasn't excitement that filled their eyes, it was disbelief, as if waiting for the moment someone would say it was all a mistake. Jackson knelt to their level. I know this doesn't feel real. I know people have promised you things and broken them, but I won't. I want to give you what Emma gave you, a safe place to be who you are. Zoe suddenly wrapped her arms around his neck. Mia followed clumsily. Jackson froze, then slowly returned the embrace, overwhelmed. Lily stood apart for a moment longer. Then with a breath, she joined them too. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't paperwork. It was the beginning of something bigger than all of them. A promise formed not with ink and signature, but with trust, silence, and a butterfly patch sewn long ago. And this time he would keep it. The afternoon sun streamed through the towering windows of Jackson's penthouse, spilling golden light across the marble floors and minimalist furniture. Everything inside his home was pristine, quiet, and curated to perfection, just as it had always been. But now, for the first time in years, it felt alive. He stood silently in the foyer, watching as the three girls wandered slowly into the vast living room. They moved cautiously, their footsteps light, as if afraid the polished surfaces might crack beneath them. Mia's eyes were wide with wonder as she reached out to touch the velvet armrest of the couch. Zoe clung to her sister Lily, the two of them barely whispering to each other in awe. Jackson didn't say anything. He didn't want to interrupt their discovery, didn't want to insert himself into a moment that felt so pure. Instead, he let his eyes drift to the small yellow backpack that Lily still carried on her shoulder. It looked even smaller in the grandeur of the penthouse, like a fragile memory nestled in a world of luxury. Yet that bag had done something. Money never could. It had kept these girls moving forward. His gaze shifted to the mantel. He hadn't touched it in years. There, between framed newspaper articles and corporate awards, sat a single photograph of Emma, laughing, mid-spin hair, wild and eyes bright. She was wearing that backpack, the butterfly patch visible even in the blur. It was a photo he'd taken during their last father-daughter hike, before the illness took everything. Without a word, Jackson walked over and picked up the photo. His fingers trembled slightly. For so long, he had avoided it, glancing at it from afar, but never daring to hold it. Now, standing in a room filled with quiet breath and cautious hope, he found the courage to lift it again. Lily's voice broke the silence. Is that her? He turned. She was standing just behind him. The younger girls now curled up on the couch, exhausted from emotion and pancakes. Her eyes weren't prying. They were reverent. Yes, Jackson said. That's Emma, my daughter. She looks happy. She was, he replied softly, especially when she was helping people. Lily stepped closer. She helped my sister when no one else would. Hannah used to get into fights all the time. She didn't trust anyone. But then Emma started drawing with her and Hannah. She changed. Jackson swallowed hard. Emma used to draw angels. Said everyone needed one. Lily smiled faintly. My sister said Emma told her she was already one, just didn't know it yet. That broke him, not in a loud, shattering way, but in the quiet collapse of a wall that had stood too long. He lowered the photo and blinked back the heat behind his eyes. Do you draw? He asked, trying to steady his voice. A little, Lily admitted. Mostly flowers and suns, sometimes people. Jackson glanced toward the hallway. Would you like to see Emma's room? Lily looked surprised. You still have it? He nodded. I couldn't bring myself to change it. He led her down the hallway, passing the study, the guest suites, and the music room. Emma used to dance in when she thought no one was watching. At the very end was a white door with a purple star sticker still half clinging to the wood. He paused, then opened it. The room was bathed in soft lavender light from the curtains Emma had picked out herself. A bookshelf lined with favorite novels stood near the bed, still arranged by color. Her stuffed animals sat neatly along the headboard, some slightly faded with time. Sketchbooks were stacked on her desk, untouched, frozen in a moment that had waited 2 years for someone to return. Lily stepped inside and immediately removed her shoes. She walked slowly, reverently, as if stepping into a sacred place. She approached the desk and ran her fingers over the spine of one of the sketchbooks. Can I? Of course, Jackson said. She opened the top one. Inside were pages of drawings, children, butterflies, angel wings, hands reaching toward the sky. In the margins, Emma had scribbled little notes. Her smile could light up the darkest shelter. He didn't say a word, but drew the best tree I've ever seen. I hope they feel seen. Lily stared at one page in particular, a girl with short hair and a crooked smile wearing a backpack with a butterfly on it. Above it, Emma had written, "Strong doesn't mean loud." That's Hannah, Lily whispered. Jackson moved closer and looked. The resemblance was uncanny. He hadn't known Emma had drawn her, but of course she had. She had captured everyone who mattered to her, given them space on her pages when the world gave them none. She saw people, Jackson said quietly. Lily nodded, and they saw her. They stood in silence for a while. Outside the window, the sun had started its slow descent behind the skyline. The shadows stretched longer, but the room felt warm, alive. Jackson turned to Lily. Would you want this to be your room? Her eyes widened. This one, I know it was Emma's, he said carefully. But I think she'd like someone kind and brave to use it. Someone who understands what this space was about. Lily's lip trembled. I don't want to erase her. You wouldn't be, he replied, kneeling beside her. You'd be continuing her story. That sentence hung in the air like a whisper. She looked around once more. Then slowly, carefully, she placed her own backpack, Emma's backpack, on the chair by the desk. Okay, she said. Jackson reached up and turned on the small desk lamp. Its soft glow illuminated the drawings, the butterfly, the books. She would have liked you, he said. Lily gave a shy smile. I think I would have liked her too. He rose to his feet and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Take your time here. I'll check on your sisters. As he stepped out and closed the door behind him, a sense of peace settled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. In that room, memories lived not in grief, but in growth. And in Lily, Emma's heart had found its next home. The evening light filtered gently through the high-rise windows, casting amber reflections across the glass walls of Jackson's penthouse. In the living room, Zoe and Mia had fallen asleep curled together on the oversized sofa, their tiny bodies lost in a sea of cushions, their expressions peaceful in a way that only children who've spent far too long in survival mode could truly appreciate. Jackson stood nearby, a warm throw blanket in his arms, watching them. He moved slowly, almost reverently, draping the blanket over their shoulders without disturbing them. The way they clung to each other in their sleep reminded him of Emma's old teddy bear, the one she never let go of after her first surgery. Safety for children like them wasn't found in locked doors or guarded buildings. It was found in connection, in touch, in knowing someone was there. He backed away quietly, heart aching in a way that felt both painful and restorative. Down the hall, he heard soft footsteps. Turning, he saw Lily approaching, her eyes wide, her expression unreadable. She held something in her hands, a sketchbook. I didn't know if it was okay to take it, she said, hesitating at the edge of the room. But I wanted to keep it close for a little while. Jackson offered a small smile. It's more than okay. I think she would have wanted you to have it. Lily came forward, sitting carefully in the armchair opposite him. She clutched the book like it was a precious artifact. And in a way it was. I didn't finish looking through all the drawings, she murmured, flipping through the pages slowly. But I saw something that made me feel like I knew her. He waited, allowing the silence to stretch. The air between them felt heavy with things unsaid, shared grief, untold stories, and the strange, fragile thread that bound them now. My sister Hannah Lily continued tracing the outline of a pencil sketch with her finger. She used to say that people only disappeared when no one remembered them. But this, she held up the sketchbook. This makes it feel like Emma is still here. Jackson swallowed hard, his voice low. That's how I feel when I look at her things. Sometimes I forget the sound of her voice, and then I find something like a note or a half-finished drawing, and I remember. She saw people the way I want to see them, Lily said, like they were more than the worst things that ever happened to them. Jackson sat down across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. Do you want to know a secret? Lily looked up, her expression curious. I used to think I could fix anything with enough money. If something broke, I'd buy a better version. If someone struggled, I'd write a check. But after Emma died, I realized I couldn't buy my way out of loss. He paused, the words catching in his throat. I spent 2 years trying to fill the hole she left. I renovated the penthouse, started new ventures, donated millions to hospitals. But none of it mattered. Nothing fit. Until now. Lily tilted her head slightly. Why now? Because this morning I woke up thinking I would visit her bench like always and then go back to my cold, quiet world. And instead, I found 3 girls who reminded me that love doesn't disappear. It just changes hands. Lily was quiet, letting the truth settle around them. I think she said after a long silence, maybe Emma gave me the backpack because she knew someone would come find it. Someone who would see it and remember her. Someone who needed to remember. Tears burned in Jackson's eyes. Maybe she gave it to you because she trusted you to carry what came next. A long pause. Then Lily looked up, her voice shaking slightly. Do you think she was scared? Before she died, Jackson's breath caught. He had asked himself that question 1,000 times. It haunted him. But now as he looked at Lily, he realized he owed her more than a sugar-coated lie. I think she was scared sometimes, he said carefully. But she never let fear stop her from loving people, from giving what she could, even when she was in pain. Lily closed the sketchbook and hugged it tightly to her chest. I don't want to be scared anymore. You don't have to be, Jackson said. You're not alone now. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. I used to dream about a place where the lights stayed on, where no one yelled and no one left, where we could sleep without keeping one eye open. He smiled gently. You just described my home before it went quiet. Maybe now it can be both of ours. She blinked at him. Ours? He nodded. Yours, Zoe's, Mia's, if you'll have it. Not just a place to sleep. A real home. One where people stay. Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked out over the glowing skyline of New York City. Her reflection stared back at her, this small, brave girl standing in a palace of glass and steel with a sketchbook pressed to her heart. She turned back. If we stay, can I keep drawing in her book? Jackson rose and walked to her side. You can fill every page. A tear slipped down Lily's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Outside, the city pulsed with life. But inside that quiet room, something more profound was happening, something even wealth couldn't measure. 2 stories were merging. 2 losses, 2 hopes, 2 hearts woven together by the girl who once stitched a butterfly with trembling hands. And now, at last, the missing piece had found its place. Warm morning sunlight flooded the pale hardwood floors of Jackson Cole's penthouse, bathing the space in a warm yellow that made the towering cityscape outside seem almost gentle. Morning light had never meant anything to him. For years, his mornings had been cold and predictable, marked by black coffee, the sound of the calendar, and the familiar click of leather shoes on marble. But today, his mornings began with laughter. Real laughter. Childish, free, alive. From the kitchen came a crash followed by a squeal. Jackson was halfway down the hall when he found the source, Zoe, crouched near the base of the refrigerator, holding what looked like a carton of eggs, or what had once been a carton of eggs. A puddle of yolk spread across the tile, and beside her, Mia clutched a whisk and wore one of Jackson's aprons, which dragged behind her like a bridal train. "I was just trying to help," Zoe exclaimed, eyes wide. Mia pointed accusingly. She dropped it. "I was reaching for the milk," before Jackson could even open his mouth. Lily stepped between her sisters and the growing mess, arms crossed and voice firm. "It's okay, we'll clean it. But you're both banned from the fridge until further notice." Jackson leaned against the door frame, watching them, not with frustration, but awe. His pristine kitchen, once used for nothing more than coffee and the occasional late-night sandwich, had become a war zone of flour-sticky spoons and small feet. And for the first time, he didn't want to change a thing. "You're awake early," Lily said, noticing him. She had her hair pulled back in a messy braid, and one of Emma's old sweaters hung from her shoulders like it belonged there. "I heard a small earthquake," he teased. "Thought I should investigate." Mia grinned and held up the whisk like a trophy. "We're making pancakes," Zoe added. "Like the ones at the cafe." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Ah, gourmet cuisine." "We found the cookbook," Lily explained, pulling it from the counter. It was one of Emma's, a handwritten food-splattered journal filled with recipes and doodles of smiling toast. "We thought maybe you'd want to eat with us." The invitation was casual, but something about it hit him deeply. "I'd love that," he said, moving to grab paper towels and crouch beside the egg spill. "First, let's fix the damage." As they cleaned, Jackson found himself smiling at the rhythm of it all. The girls bickering about whose turn it was to stir Lily, carefully measuring ingredients while glancing over her sister's shoulders, Zoe humming some silly tune as she wiped the counter with excessive amounts of soap. By the time the pancakes were sizzling on the stove, the kitchen looked like a flour bomb had exploded. But the scent, sweet and buttery, was worth every bit of the mess. They set the table together, mismatched plates and cups, juice boxes beside polished silverware. Mia insisted they all sit at the long dining table, the one Jackson rarely used. "Big table for big family," she said with authority. And somehow that made perfect sense. As they sat, Jackson looked around at the three girls, now fully immersed in their breakfast, giggling over uneven pancake shapes. One looked like a boot, another like a heart. He'd hosted CEOs in this room, fed royalty, made deals worth billions over glasses of aged wine. But no meal had ever filled the room like this one. Halfway through, Zoe set down her fork and asked, "Do you have meetings today?" Jackson paused. "Not anymore." "Like, ever?" She blinked. He chuckled. "I have people who handle things now. I wanted to be here. With you." Lily looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and something warmer, something hopeful. "You changed everything. For us." Jackson's smile faded into something more solemn. "No, Lily, you changed everything for me." There was a beat of silence, one heavy with understanding. Then Mia, in classic fashion, shattered it with a loud hiccup, followed by her own delighted laughter. Later, the girls begged for music. Jackson, amused and still in his robe, handed over his phone. Within seconds, the living room transformed into a dance floor. Pop music filled the air, and the girls spun across the glossy floors, barefoot and wild. Zoe climbed onto the couch and leapt down with a dramatic flair. Superstar Mia followed, twirling in circles until she collapsed in dizzy giggles. Lily danced more softly, letting her braids swing behind her as she moved. Jackson watched, caught between joy and bittersweet memory. Emma had danced in that very spot once, chasing imaginary stars. He didn't stop them. He didn't rush them. He simply turned up the volume and let the music carry them. Eventually exhausted from the chaos, they flopped onto the couch in a pile of limbs and laughter. Jackson brought them water, tucking their hair behind their ears, the way a father might, something he hadn't done in far too long. Mia looked up sleepily. "Do all mornings feel like this now?" Jackson sat beside them, heart full. "They can." Zoe asked, Even if we break something, especially then. The sun had climbed higher now, the city outside fully awake. But in Hud, wrapped in the warmth of this strange new family, the day felt different. Not hurried, not hollow, not quiet. It felt like life. As Jackson watched the girls begin to drift into a second round of post-pancake sleep, he realized something else. For so long, his home had been a place of silence and echoes. But now it had a pulse again. A heartbeat made not of clocks and deadlines, but of laughter, spilled syrup, and the gentle hum of belonging. And this busy morning, this beautiful, imperfect, chaotic morning, wasn't an interruption. It was a beginning. The lights in the penthouse had dimmed, casting a warm amber glow across the living room, where just hours earlier, music and laughter had danced across the walls. Now the air had settled into stillness, gentle and sacred. The city outside pulsed with its usual rhythm, headlights streaking the windows and sirens echoing far below. But within these walls, a softer world had taken shape. Jackson stood in the doorway of the guest room, his arms folded tightly, watching the three girls sleep. Zoe and Mia lay tangled together under a pale blue blanket, their limbs sprawled out like tiny stars, their faces relaxed in a peace that only children exhausted by joy and safety could wear. On the nearby twin bed, Lily was curled up on her side, her arms wrapped tightly around a pillow, her breathing slow and steady. The same steady rhythm he had once listened to through a baby monitor late at night with Emma asleep in the next room. His eyes lingered on Lily longer. There was something about the way she held herself, even in sleep, tensed, almost bracing for something to go wrong. She hadn't fully relaxed, not yet, not completely, but she was close. So close. In the quiet, Jackson felt something tug at him. It wasn't duty, it wasn't pity, it was something far deeper. Something that came from the core of a man who had known great loss and who was now being offered a chance to rewrite the ending. He stepped silently down the hall toward his bedroom. The door creaked softly as he entered, and the faint scent of lavender drifted toward him from the open balcony doors. The night breeze stirred the sheer curtains as he walked toward the chair by the fireplace. There, resting gently where Lily had left it earlier that evening, was the faded yellow backpack. Emma's backpack. He sat down slowly, picking it up with both hands as if it might crumble beneath his touch. The butterfly patch was still intact, though fraying at the corners. The fabric was stained in places, the zippers slightly bent, but it was unmistakably hers. Jackson held it to his chest. At first he just breathed. Then the tears came quiet, raw, unstoppable. He clutched his backpack, burying his face in it as waves of emotion washed over him. He cried for Emma, for lost time, for words unsaid, for the silence that had filled his life since he said goodbye. But he also cried for Lily, for the courage she had worn like armor, for the way she had protected her sisters with a promise, for the burden she had carried since she was 7. He cried for every child out there still sleeping on benches, and for the father he wished he had been sooner. And when the tears slowed, what remained was clarity. He stood up still, holding the backpack, and walked back down the hallway. He paused once more at the guest room door. The girls hadn't moved. Lily had shifted slightly, her brow furrowed as if in the grip of a dream. Jackson stepped closer. Gently, he pulled the blanket up to her shoulder, careful not to wake her. The sight of her made something in him settle. A decision that had been growing silently all day took full shape now. It wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't even a choice, it was a truth. These girls, Lily, Zoe, and Mia, they were his responsibility now. Not temporarily, not as a good deed or a tribute to Emma, but as a father. They needed more than just shelter and food. They needed consistency, love, protection, a home that would not be taken away when the world grew inconvenient. And he had all of that to give. The next morning before the girls awoke, Jackson made his first call to his attorney. Mark, he said the moment the line connected, his voice steady, I need to initiate guardianship proceedings, emergency custody, then full adoption. There was a pause on the other end. For how many children, Mark asked carefully. 3, Jackson replied. 3 girls, sisters. Mark didn't ask questions. He had worked with Jackson long enough to know that when he spoke like this, he meant every word. I'll get started today. Jackson hung up and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to rise again, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. It reminded him of a watercolor Emma had once painted and taped to the fridge, a picture of 3 girls holding hands under a golden sketch. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. Now he realized maybe she'd seen something even then. Maybe she'd known that one day her heart would live on, not in memories but in people. In Lily's quiet strength, in Zoe's open heart, in Mia's untamed joy. He returned to the guest room one last time that morning. Kneeling beside Lily's bed, he whispered so softly it barely broke the air, "You're safe now, I promise." And this time it wasn't a vow made from grief or guilt. It was a father's promise, and he intended to keep it for the rest of his life. The day Jackson walked into the family court building, the morning air was heavy with anticipation. He had faced investors with billions on the line, navigated global mergers with steely composure, and delivered keynote speeches to thousands. But this was different. The stakes weren't measured in numbers or headlines. This was about three little girls asleep in his penthouse that morning, unaware their entire future was about to shift forever. His black sedan pulled up in front of the courthouse, its sleek reflection glinting against the marble steps. Jackson stepped out, dressed not in his usual Navy power suit, but in a softer gray one, Emma used to say, made him look more like a dad and less like a CEO. It felt right. His lawyer, Mark Langford, was already waiting inside, files in hand, eyes scanning the corridor until they landed on him. "You ready?" Mark asked, his voice low but sure. Jackson nodded. "Let's do this." They walked through the security line, past rows of benches lined with parents, social workers, and children clutching stuffed animals. It was not the kind of place Jackson had ever imagined himself in, yet today it felt like exactly where he needed to be. They entered the hearing room and were greeted by a female judge in her 60s, Judge Amelia Drayton. Her presence was firm, maternal, and surprisingly kind. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun, and her glasses sat low on her nose as she skimmed through the preliminary paperwork Mark had submitted earlier that morning. "You're Mr. Jackson Cole," she said, lifting her gaze. "I see you're seeking emergency guardianship of three minors." "Yes, Your Honor," Jackson replied, his voice calm but filled with something raw. "Lily, age 8, Zoe and Mia, age 5. Sisters. Are you biologically related to any of the children?" she asked, jotting a note on the form. "No, ma'am. Have you known them for long?" Jackson hesitated only for a breath. "Not long in time, but long enough to know I would do anything to keep them safe." The judge looked up again, eyes narrowing not in suspicion but curiosity. "You're one of the wealthiest men in this state, Mr. Cole." "Forgive me for asking, but why three homeless girls?" Jackson stepped forward slightly. "Because they're not just three homeless girls. They're children who were failed by every system around them. And my daughter Emma, she spent the last months of her life giving them what little she had. A backpack, kindness, attention. That kindness saved them." He swallowed hard. "Now it's my turn." The judge studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Do they have any living relatives?" "Not that we've located," Mark interjected. "Their mother has been hospitalized for some time with a severe illness. There is no father listed on record and no extended family has stepped forward." Jackson's jaw tightened slightly. He remembered Lily saying that herself. "They wouldn't let us stay with her. So we ran." "And you're prepared," Judge Drayton continued to take full responsibility for them. "Not just materially, but emotionally, legally, as a parent, not a guardian." Jackson's voice didn't waver. "Yes, Your Honor, with everything I have." The courtroom was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the back wall. Then Judge Drayton finally smiled softly, almost imperceptibly, and reached for her gavel. "Pending background and home valuation, which I suspect will go smoothly given your resources, I'm granting you temporary guardianship of Lily, Zoe, and Mia, effective immediately. Full adoption proceedings will be considered once the required assessments are complete." The gavel struck the wood. The sound rang in Jackson's ears like a bell, like the closing of one chapter and the opening of something entirely new. He exhaled, not realizing he had been holding his breath. Mark clapped him on the back as they exited the hearing room. "You did good." "No," Jackson said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "They did." Outside, the air felt lighter, brighter, as if the sun had finally caught up with him. He didn't return to his office or to any waiting boardroom. Instead, he returned home to the only place that mattered now. When he entered the penthouse, he heard the sound of tiny feet sprinting down the hallway. Jackson, Zoe shouted, launching herself into his arms, almost knocking his briefcase to the ground. Hey, what's all this energy?" He laughed, catching her midair. We made toast, Mia declared proudly, her face covered in jelly. Lily came into view a second later, more reserved as always, though her eyes sparkled with a silent question. Did you do it? He nodded once, a subtle gesture that only she caught. Her face didn't light up right away. She had learned not to celebrate too soon, but her shoulders relaxed, and that was enough. Later that evening, they sat on the floor together in the living room. The girls had turned the space into a fortress of pillows and blankets, their giggles echoing off the marble walls. Jackson sat among them, tie loosened shoes off arms, wrapped around the three girls he hadn't known a week ago, but now couldn't imagine living without. He told them the news gently. What's guardianship? Zoe asked, mouthful of marshmallow. It means I get to take care of you, he replied. Legally, officially, forever. Mia added, voice muffled under a blanket. He glanced at Lily before answering. Yes, he said softly, forever. Lily looked down at the butterfly patch on her sister's backpack, the one now resting beside her like an old friend. Emma had given them something they couldn't name, but Jackson had finally put a word to it. Family. That night, as the girls drifted off to sleep, Jackson stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest. The city stretched far beyond, still buzzing, still burning with movement and ambition. But for the first time, he didn't feel like chasing it. He already had everything he needed. He didn't just gain guardianship that day. He gained a future. One filled with giggles, broken crayons, surprise pancake disasters, and bedtime stories. And more than anything, one filled with love. The sun broke over the Manhattan skyline with golden brilliance the morning the final court hearing arrived. Inside the penthouse, it wasn't the alarm clock or the buzz of work emails that woke Jackson Cole. It was the soft hum of tiny voices whispering in the hallway, followed by a knock on his bedroom door. Are you up? Lily's voice floated through. Jackson swung his feet out of bed and opened the door to find Lily standing in her best dress, the same one she wore the day they visited the shelter ruins. Zoe and Mia were behind her, each holding a tiny bouquet of tissue paper flowers they'd made the night before with the nanny's help. The moment was too precious for words. You're up early, he smiled. It's adoption day, Lily said simply. Jackson nodded, a lump rising in his throat. Yes, it is. Hours later, they stood in the same courtroom, where weeks earlier he had been granted temporary guardianship. This time, the room felt warmer, more familiar. Judge Amelia Drayton presided again, her robe flowing and her demeanor gentle as she looked at the papers in front of her. Zoe sat between Jackson and Lily, swinging her feet and trying her best to stay still. Mia had a firm grip on Jackson's hand, her hair pinned back with a sparkly clip. And Lily, though quiet, sat upright, calm, composed, invisibly holding her sister steady through the moment. Judge Drayton looked up. Mr. Cole, I've reviewed all documentation and psychological evaluations. Your home study was exemplary. The children are thriving in your care, and the social workers report emotional improvement across all three girls. Jackson nodded, heart thudding. She turned to the girls. Now, I know this is a big decision, but before we finalize the adoption, I'd like to ask each of you something. Zoe raised her hand immediately. Can I go first? Judge Drayton chuckled. Please. Can we still call him Jackson, even if he's our dad? She asked, eyes wide. The courtroom chuckled softly. You can call him whatever you like, the judge replied kindly. Mia added, I want to call him Daddy, but only if Lily says it's okay. Everyone turned to Lily. She blinked and looked at Jackson. I think it's okay, she said quietly. He's earned it. Jackson's chest tightened with emotion. Judge Drayton turned to him. Mr. Cole, you've taken in these children under tragic circumstances. What they've endured would crush many adults. But from what I've seen, they've found not only shelter with you, but safety, affection, and consistency. Are you ready to become their legal father? I've been ready, Jackson said. I just didn't know it until they came into my life. The judge smiled, lifted her gavel, and struck it down gently. Then I hereby declare Lily, Zoe, and Mia as the legally adopted daughters of Jackson Elias Cole. Gasps, applause, even a few tears from court staff followed. Jackson turned to the girls. You're officially mine. Forever. Zoe squealed and threw her arms around him. Mia tackled his leg, but Lily stood still for a moment, her eyes filling with tears, not from sadness, but from something deeper, relief. She stepped forward and hugged him around the waist, burying her face against his suit. Thank you for not giving up on us, she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. Thank you for letting me in. Outside the courthouse, the spring air was fresh, fragrant with city blossoms and the scent of new beginnings. A sleek black SUV waited at the curb, but Jackson didn't rush. Instead, he walked with the girls, one on each hand and Lily by his side. Back at the penthouse, the celebration continued. Emma's old room had been carefully transformed, not into something new, but into something shared. Her favorite books were still on the shelves, but now Zoe had tucked in her stuffed giraffe. Mia had lined up her crayons in a neat row on the desk, and Lily had added the butterfly backpack, framed now with a tiny gold plaque beneath it, Emma's wings, the gift that brought us home. In the living room, staff brought out a cake Lily had secretly helped design, chocolate with pink frosting, topped with 4 tiny figures holding hands. You even included yourself, Jackson said with surprise when he saw the extra figure. Lily shrugged shyly. You're part of our story too now. That night, as the city lights flickered across the skyline and the girls nestled into their shared bedtime routine, one reading, one drawing, one already snoring, Jackson sat alone on the terrace, a mug of tea in hand, heart full. For years, he had believed success lived in the world of stock tickers and global strategy. But now he understood that success could also look like syrup, sticky hands at breakfast, mismatched socks in the laundry, and tiny footsteps running down the hall yelling his name, or Daddy. He stood and walked quietly to the girls' room. All 3 were fast asleep, their breathing soft, peaceful. Jackson knelt by their beds one by one, tucking the blankets gently around their shoulders. He paused at Lily's bed last. She stirred, eyes blinking open. You're still up. Just wanted to check on you. Everything okay? He smiled. Perfect. Good, she whispered. 'Cause this feels like forever. And for once the word forever didn't scare him. It felt like home. The wind carried the faint scent of spring rain as a crowd gathered on the steps of the newly restored red brick building on 3rd Street. The once shuttered doors were now wide open, their fresh white paint gleaming under the sunlight. Above them, brand new sign had been hung. Emma's Haven, Pooing, a place to be seen. A year had passed since Jackson Cole first found Lily, 8 years old, barefoot and fiercely protective of her sisters in that fog-covered park. Back then, she had been carrying a tattered yellow backpack, a relic of his late daughter Emma. Now, as he stood behind the podium on the shelter's reopening day, he watched Lily from a distance and felt something far bigger than pride. He felt purpose. She stood in front of the crowd not as a fragile child, but as the official youth ambassador of the shelter, dressed in a simple lavender dress that Emma would have loved, her posture strong, her words rehearsed in the mirror for weeks. This place isn't just a building, Mary. Lily began speaking into the microphone with a voice steady beyond her years. It's a promise. It's what Emma believed in when no one else saw us. It's where my sister learned to trust people. It's where I first saw hope. Jackson blinked rapidly, his heart swelling. Behind him stood Zoe and Mia, holding hands in matching butterfly barrettes. The 2 girls had blossomed over the past year, learning, healing, laughing. They were no longer just surviving. They were thriving. The building behind them had once been a symbol of loss, a place abandoned, forgotten. Jackson remembered his first visit, the boarded-up windows, the rusted locks. But Emma had walked through those halls, once crayon box in hand, offering joy to children the world had pushed aside. Now, thanks to Jackson's investment, and more importantly, his heart, Emma's work would continue. Lily's voice carried through the crowd. When we lived on the streets, we didn't have bedtime stories. We didn't have a front door to lock. We didn't even have pillows, but we had each other, and eventually, we had Jackson. The crowd turned slightly toward him, but Lily wasn't done. People say he saved us, but the truth is we saved each other. He gave us a home, and now we want to give one to others. Applause rippled through the gathering, and Jackson felt a familiar pressure in his chest, the kind he used to associate with boardroom triumphs, only now it came not from closing deals, but from watching a child discover her own voice. When Lily stepped back, Jackson moved to the podium. Thank you all for being here, he began, pausing as the crowd hushed. A year ago, I found 3 children on a park bench, and I thought I was helping them. But I didn't know then that they were the ones helping me. They opened my eyes. They brought me back to the best parts of myself. He scanned the faces, watching supporters, press volunteers, and even a few city officials who had initially resisted the reopening. This shelter was the last place my daughter Emma gave her time. She came here not because she had to, but because she believed every child deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. When I lost her, I lost that part of the world too. He turned slightly to face Lily. But then Lily came into my life, and I realized Emma hadn't vanished. She had passed on something. Something bigger than any one person. And that's what this shelter stands for. Not charity, not pity, but legacy, compassion, and community. He stepped back to thunderous applause, but his eyes never left the children. Later, after the crowd had moved inside to tour the colorful playroom, counseling offices, and stocked pantry, Jackson sat on the steps with Lily beside him. The bustle faded behind them, replaced by the distant sounds of kids discovering soft blankets, storybooks, and a table filled with warm food. Lily held a small ribbon in her hand, the same one she'd used to tie her hair the day she met Jackson. "Do you think she'd be proud?" she asked, voice quieter, now stripped of ceremony. Jackson looked up at the sky for a moment before answering. "I think Emma's watching all of this, and I think she's smiling so hard it hurts." Lily nodded and leaned against his side. "Sometimes I talk to her in my head." "Is that weird?" "Not at all," Jackson said, wrapping an arm around her. "I do it too." A breeze stirred the trees lining the sidewalk, and the shelter's new banner fluttered above them. Inside, a little boy with a chipped tooth giggled as he colored on a table Emma had once sat at. A volunteer helped a teenage girl fold her first clean blanket in weeks. And outside, under the same sun that had once witnessed a broken man meet a broken child, sat a family made not by blood, but by resilience, kindness, and quiet miracles. As people began to leave and the afternoon faded into golden light, Jackson turned to Lily one last time. "I know it's been a big year," he said softly. "Are you happy?" Lily didn't answer right away. She just looked at the shelter, at the children running through its doors, and then at the butterfly pins she now wore proudly on her dress. "I'm not just happy," she said. "I'm home." And Jackson, for the first time in a long, long while, felt it too. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you are watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen. Now,